recognize myself now for 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. McCabe, you look like you were jumping out of your seat when Mr. Swalwell asked Mr. Kudell the question about standardization, and I wanted to let you, whether the federal government should get involved or not, because insurance is usually, it's a state issue. We let each state come up with their own rules, and it's governed by the state. So, what was your response to that question?
I was just leaning in to hear the answer a little more closely. But, I understand the issue around standardizing language. I mean, when the policies are written differently and it's not your 9-to-5 job to review cyber insurance policies, it could be confusing one to the other. I can confirm that there's a wide amount of overlap for every cyber insurance policy. They largely cover the same thing. They largely have the same exclusions. A lot of the language is very common. The one thing about standardization that doesn't make me feel particularly good is it's still an emerging line of coverage. There's still a point of innovation where carriers are coming out and trying to figure out how they want to address the risk. There is a very innovative approach by one carrier where they've defined a widespread event that's going to have many of their insureds impacted. They will provide full limits for that event, but why they do it is they design their own exposure mitigation behind it. So they're thinking through what their aggregation risks are, and sometimes that language is going to be reflected in how they write the policy, and you would hate to see some kind of very regulatory effort to stymie that.
This is just a follow-up question, because if there is somehow, I know some people have said federal backstop. I'm not saying that's the answer, and I don't know how deep we want to get into that today, but if the federal government does do a backstop, and again, I'm a huge proponent of states doing insurance. I do not want us taking over, the federal government taking over any sort of insurance policy, really. But if we do have a backstop, how much, and Mr. Kudell, you can jump in on this too, how much should we be involved, though, in the issuing of policies, in the if we're gonna get involved with the money, what else should we get involved with?
Thank you for the question. I can jump on it. We had two examples today, TRIA as well as NEP IP. I mean, they're designed for different purposes and the involvement of government in private sector. To the extent the issue private cyber insurance market has the limitations, it's really the lack in the coverage primarily into the realm of a catastrophic risk trade. And although we have new players coming into ILS and reinsurance market recently, that market is still maturing. It's not there good enough. My personal opinion is a government reinsurance facility that structured somewhat like TRIA is probably a much better aligned approach so that the government does not have to sit in as a insurer alongside other insurance like the NFIP does. Although NFIP program has an amazing risk management practices and codes, there's obviously best of the both. But most of the limitation on the primary cyber market is because of a lack of maturity into the catastrophic risk trade, really.
Any other witnesses? Mr. McCabe?
If I may, I just would resist any kind of framing that said the backstop is about what we need to do for insurance companies, because that's not true at all. So insurance policies contain a war exclusion for nation-state attacks, and they contain exclusions about disabling and disrupting critical infrastructure. And the thought is that if we're going to have this big of a catastrophic event, it's going to trigger one of these two exclusions, and the insurance carriers are not going to have to pay on those losses. That's their way of managing their exposure. What the backstop is about are the companies that are going to be left with that risk on their own books, and how is the government going to help those small and medium-sized and large businesses that are going to be impacted? It's a U.S. economic security problem.
Absolutely. And look, we've seen, Colonial Pipeline, Change Healthcare, we've seen, these are small compared to what we're talking about today. I mean, this is and I'm going to follow up, because I'm going to do a second round of question, but we're talking about things that people aren't even expecting. And I know, Mrs. Lewis, you made the comment about we might have to go on the offense against some of and that's something Mr. Jimenez loves to talk about. I wish he was here so he could talk about it further. But yeah, this is not, people think of cyber attacks here, they think of Colonial Pipeline, think of Change. That's nothing compared to what could actually happen and where this would really trigger. So I'm going to come around for a second question, but I know I'm out for this time, so I'm going to represent my friend from Mississippi, Mr. Zell, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today and discussing this, and thank you, Mr.